Today we're going to talk about something. It's time to take some ownership, Nate. Don't you think?
Yeah, always.
So today we're going to be talking about some dynasty hits and misses. We're not perfect. We're also not full-time analysts. We do the best we can to give you guys the best information that we can, given recent trends, past patterns, stuff like that. Try to do a little foreshadowing for the upcoming season. We cannot always predict everything. We just can't. We're going to try. So we're going to be talking about some players today that we either hit or missed on. Nate, why don't you start us off with a hit?
Going and talking about a player that I hit on this year and I was really excited about is James Cook, running back for the Buffalo Bills. And why I was so excited about him this year is because at the end of last year, the Buffalo Bills became one of the run heaviest teams to end the season. Over the last 4 games, they were the run heaviest team in the NFL. To end the season, they made the switch to Joe Brady as the new offensive coordinator, and this team became very run heavy. While Josh Allen, of course, is having a MVP caliber kind of year, the real MVP is Lamar Jackson, of course, but while Josh Allen is having an incredible year, this team has continued to be pretty run heavy throughout the year, and James Cook has been a benefactor of that. Now, when you actually look at the attempts, because Josh Allen has actually done a lot himself on the ground, you look at the attempts, and he actually doesn't really have many more attempts per game. It's under 1. It's like 0.4 more attempts per game. It's really negligible, to be honest, between the two last season and this season. But the big difference is this year, he has 13 rushing touchdowns, James Cook does. That is a career high because the last 2 seasons, he's had 2 rushing touchdowns each season. So quite the difference in his production this year. And if you go back, we look at where the standings were at the end of last year for the running back position. James Cook was the RB12. All right. He averaged 13.7 points per game last year and was the RB12. This year, he's the RB13. So you think, oh, well, he's having a worse year, right? He's the RB13. He's the RB12 last year. Well, no, he's actually averaging 3.1 more points per game. He's averaging 16.8 points per game this year. But those rushing touchdowns is really where it's come into play. And the fact that they've really anointed him as the RB1 for this team. Josh Allen has 11 rushing touchdowns himself. So there's actually more rushing touchdowns that could have been there for James Cook this year. But 13 is obviously a great number to have. He's not quite an RB1 apparently, according to the standings, but at 16.8 per game, he's an RB1 for your team in your lineup on a week-to-week basis. And I was lucky enough to have a good amount of James Cook this year, bought into him over the offseason. A lot of people looking at him as kind of a complementary piece to the offense. But after they got rid of Stephon Diggs and they changed to that run-heavy offense at the end of last season, I knew that there was something that was going to be coming with James Cook, and we've got to enjoy it this year. And I think the big takeaway of this is, because Mike, as we're going over these hits and misses today, we want to talk about why they were hits, why they were misses, because we want to learn from our process. It's great to own up to our hits, own up to our misses, but we need to learn from them. That's the big thing here. And learning from James Cook is, you need to pay attention to what happens at the end of the season, because a lot of times it takes us into the next season. So like I said, last year we saw Joe Brady take over as the offensive coordinator. This team became much more run heavy. And in preparation for this season, I took that and, was expecting it this season. Now, we can't always take what we see at the end of last season, expect it next season, but taking a look at the last 4, 5, 6 weeks of the season can really help us look at players who are ready to break out. And this applies to college football as well. A lot of times at the end of the season, into bowl season, we see freshmen, sophomores break out in college and end up having huge seasons the next year. Same thing kind of applies to the NFL, especially with rookies, second-year players, third-year players. Who catches fire at the end of the season? Who really has it click at the end of the season? Take that and look at next year. And that's what we did here with James Cook, and we're reaping the benefits. So as we get to the end of this season, who's taken off at the end of this season? We're going to maybe talk about it later, but let's make sure we're taking notice of who's on fire to end the season, because a lot of times it means next year's success.
All right, very good. And let's talk about a teammate of his. Hey, the Buffalo Bills, they do throw the ball a little bit up there in Orchard Park too. I'm going to talk about a hit of mine. That's Buffalo Bills wide receiver Khalil Shakir. He did miss a game with an ankle sprain, but he's still averaging 13.3 fantasy points per game. He's leading the team in receiving yards by almost 300. Now, I put this on the sheet this morning before they played their game, Shakir was at 774. and Keon Coleman was at 481. So that's a pretty big gap. And then today, Shakir only 22 yards receiving, but Keon Coleman only 17. Bills only threw for 152 yards total in today's game. James Cook, though, had a heck of a game, 11 carries, 100 yards, and a touchdown. And then he tacked on 3 catches for 26 yards and a touchdown through the air, too. So James Cook, also a very good receiver out of the backfield as well. I think that's one of the aspects of his game that people don't talk about a lot. But as far as Khalil Shakir goes, this is a guy who's just been a real steady Eddie in my lineup there. Love what he brings. 13.3 fantasy points per game as your wide receiver 3 or flex play. Really, really good option in that spot. So what I learned was that sometimes it's worth the wait. Look at his first 2 years. His first 2 years, receiving yards, 777. So he's only off of that by 3 yards for this year total at 774. Obviously more now after that game. He had 3 touchdowns total in those 2 years. He has 4 already this year. So you could see this one season is already surpassing his past 2. He was worth the wait. That's what I learned. Don't give up on these guys too early. He had to overcome some things. Stephon Diggs was there. Gabe Davis was there as well. So it took a while for him to be relevant. The proverbial third-year breakout, if you will. When he was drafted, I didn't like the draft spot. A lot of times, and I get sucked into it too. You see these guys get drafted. We try to draft guys in a rookie draft that are going to be relevant right away. Just got to wait it out. I should have drafted him. He's going like the 3rd round in a lot of drafts. Should have grabbed him, threw him on the taxi squad, let him hang out on the bench. I should have also tried to buy low on him more in the offseason. I did not get a chance to, but in all fairness to me, I did. But when people don't respond to trade offers, there's really not much that I could do about that. So be patient. Don't overreact to things. Let sometimes wide receivers, they take a little bit longer to become relevant, especially in an offense like that was pretty stacked. Not everyone can be Jamar Chase. So that's a hit of mine. Nate, do you have another hit for us?
I sure do. At the tight end position, one of our favorite positions. I mean, there's only 4 that we really talk about that often, but tight end is certainly one of our favorites. George Kittle, coming into the season, a lot of people were writing him off, whether it was because there was a lot of mouths to feed with the 49ers offense or because George Kittle was old. That's what I was hearing. George Kittle's old. George Kittle's old. He was 30 years old coming into the season. For a tight end, I don't think that's old, okay? We've seen Travis Kelce, we've seen Zach Ertz, we've seen tight ends for years now, all going back to Antonio Gates and Tony Gonzalez. They don't drop off a cliff when they turn 30. They drop off a cliff like when they're like 35. So George Kittle, a lot of people are sleeping on him this year after he came off of a tight end 5 finish last year and had career highs in a couple different categories. George Kittle had an amazing season last year, and a lot of people dropped him for it because he turned 30 during the season. Okay. I don't get it. I didn't get it then. I don't get it now, but I was able to reap the benefits. I went ahead and acquired some George Kittle over the offseason, had him starting in a lot of my lineups this year, which is why I made the playoffs in so many of my leagues. And right now he is tight end 3 on the season and tight end 1 in points per game, actually over Brock Bowers, surprisingly, because, Brock Bowers has had an incredible season. Though after this week, last time I checked, Brock Bowers had a pretty good Sunday. So Brock Bowers might be back on top in points per game. But George Kittle did turn 31 this year. Like I said, we don't need to fade tight ends. I think this is the takeaway from the George Kittle experience this year is don't fade tight ends when they turn 30. Let them get to 34, 35 before you really start fading them. And of course, this is for the elite tight ends like George Kittle. We're not talking about, just some guys, been a backup for a lot of his, career, has had some opportunities as a tight end 1 of the team. We're talking about an elite tight end in the NFL. An elite tight end is not going to drop off at the age of 30, 31 years old. We've seen that with George Kittle. We've seen that with Travis Kelce. Like I mentioned, there's other tight ends. We have Mark Andrews, who's going to be turning 30 next year. Don't worry about him. He's got more than a couple years left for himself. So as we go into this offseason, we've already seen Mark Andrews, his rankings come down on Keep Trade Cut and other services because he's older. He had a slow start to the season. Now, that slow start to the season, not just because he's old, which he's 29 years old currently, but because he had an injury that was coming off of last year. He did have a car accident right before the season, about 2 weeks before the season started, which he missed a lot of practice for. So some other things played into that. So as we go into this offseason, how about you look at some tight ends? If you need to fill that tight end position on your team, look at Mark Andrews, look at George Kittle, look at these older tight ends because the tight end lifespan is longer than a lot of other positions. It's longer certainly than running back. It might be longer than wide receiver. because we do see a lot of wide receivers start to drop off at about 31, 32 years old. And like I said, I think tight ends usually get to at least 33, 34, maybe even 35 if they're elite. So I think the lifespan of those guys is a little bit longer. So don't be hesitant to buy into an older tight end if you're a competitive team, because these guys can make the difference for you. Having George Kittle this year really elevated your ability to make the playoffs. And I think going into next year, having a guy like George Kittle, Mark Andrews is going to continue to do the same.
Dude, I'm going to talk about another hit now, and that is Washington Commanders running back Brian Robinson Jr. Had a bit of a down day today. Only 10 carries for 24 yards, 2 catches for 17 yards, no touchdowns, and he lost 2 fumbles. The Eagles' run defense is really good.
Yeah.
They got the Commanders got down, and they had to pass a lot. They just kind of eliminated the running game, but still, for the most part, I said it before, this guy's a steady Eddie. He was good when Austin Eckler was there. He's out right now. Eckler was concussed, I believe. Another guy averaging 13.3 fantasy points per game. That's tied with Bucky Irving and Tony Pollard, by the way. And he missed 3 games, 2 for a hamstring and 1 for a knee injury. He's still under contract through 2025, although I do believe the Commanders will resign him. I don't see why they wouldn't. He's not a liability. He doesn't really fumble a lot, except for today. Overall, this is a guy that people seem to be down on. And that's what I learned, that when people are down on a guy like this, and they seem to get even more down on him when they signed Eckler. Eckler's been a good piece for the Commanders, but the offense running-wise typically goes through Brian Robinson Jr. So when people devalue a starting running back, let that be, notice to you, hey, if I could buy low on this guy, he's just an awesome guy to have in your lineup, a really good RB2, or a lot of places I have him in my flex spot. I have 2 nice running backs up there. He's a really good flex play, pretty good. And also he's had more 100-yard rushing games this year than I think he's had throughout his career. He has 3 or 4, I believe. He only had 2 up until this point. So he's getting more carries. That Cliff Kingsbury offense, pretty good for him. Didn't think he would fit in with the way they typically play, but looks good. Good. I like me some Brian Robinson Jr. Nate, do you want to talk about his former teammate? What do you got?
Yeah, we talk about our hits, Mike. We also have to talk about some of our misses and some of the players we did not hit on. Some of the players maybe we were too excited about and did not perform this year for a multitude of reasons. One player I definitely have to mention, who I was banging the drum on for the past 2 years, is Jahan Dotson. And it's been one of the greatest disappointments for me over the past couple seasons, going back to maybe Treylon Burks, who I drafted a ton of at his rookie year. But Jahan Dotson was someone, I drafted a ton of him his rookie year. He had a good rookie year, but then last year was mostly out there running cardio. He was under 1 yard per route run with the Commanders. I thought it was a lot of the issue with the offense as a whole. Sam Howell getting sacked so much, not being, the franchise quarterback for them. Getting Jaden Daniels this year, I was very excited about Jahan Dotson. Coming into the year, I believe he was already my most rostered player, but I went ahead and doubled down on Jahan Dotson. Really was expecting him to take off with Jaden Daniels as his quarterback. And before the season even started, they traded him to the Philadelphia Eagles. And it's not like the Washington Commanders have a very deep wide receiver room. So, I don't know if it was off the field issues, if it was on the field issues at practice or whatever it was, but something wasn't vying for Jahan Dotson and this Commanders team over the offseason. And it hasn't really been going his way this season either. I mean, you're an Eagles fan. You've gotten to watch him, but apparently you haven't gotten to watch him too much, because he has 12 catches for 122 yards this year. Certainly an all-time disappointment for me after 500 plus yards in both of his first 2 seasons, not even at 150 yards so far this year. I don't really have much of an answer as to why, because there wasn't a lot of smoke. Like Deontay Johnson with the Ravens. Deontay Johnson, another huge disappointment for me. I've obviously been very invested in Deontay over the years. He has treated me very well previously before this season. Even the first half of the season, I was pretty happy with Deontay. But he went to the Ravens, betrayed me on so many levels, just with the NFL, with the Ravens, but also in fantasy. But, with Deontay, there's smoke. There's smoke about him, being, some issues in the locker room, things like that. We've heard about that over the past couple of years, apparently. But with Jahan, I haven't really heard anything. So I don't really have a great answer for him, other than the fact that, hey, number one, maybe don't have too much exposure to one single player. I'm in about 15 dynasty leagues. I had Jahan Dotson in 12 of them. So, that hurt across most of my leagues, vast majority of my leagues, that one hurt. So maybe, once you get to maybe about 50% exposure, maybe start going somewhere else, because if you have too much of one player and it doesn't work out, it's going to hurt you. So that's one lesson I'm trying to take away from this, especially after last year. Like I said, he was under 1 yard per route run. I should have diversified from Jahan Dotson going into the season and taken my emotions and my bias out of it and understood that, hey, there was some issues with last season. I don't need to double down on this. I can diversify a little bit. I can still keep a good amount of Jahan Dotson in my portfolio. We're talking about maybe a portfolio kind of style of dynasty, but I need to take that into account moving into next season, look at who maybe I'm overexposed to across my leagues, and make sure that I'm not too invested in a single player. And also, being able to pivot when you see something negative occur, like last year's season with Jahan Dotson. Maybe there was more to it than just me saying, oh, it was the Washington Commanders offense, maybe some issues with their play calling, things like that. Diving a bit deeper into it and trying to figure out why maybe a player I like so much didn't have the season I expected him to. So something I need to continue to look at and try to improve from. But Jahan Dotson, definitely one of my biggest misses this year and over the past couple of years.
Let's talk about my miss, and that's Denver Broncos running back Javonte Williams. I don't know if Sean Payton just doesn't like him or if he's not a fit for this scheme. I did not envision this at all. He's averaging only 3.6 yards per carry. He's lost playing time overall to players like Jaleel McLaughlin and Audric Estime. Audric Estime was a day 3 draft pick. I believe McLaughlin was a UDFA.
Yep.
And this one, what did I learn? I'm not sure. It's kind of perplexing because when you looked at it before the season, everything looked lined up for him to be the guy, and he just isn't. I know he had that knee injury a couple years ago, but at this point, he should be good to go, fully recovered from that. If you just look at it, like on what was it, Thursday night when the Broncos played the Chargers, when the Broncos blew that lead to the Chargers, I should say. He averaged 6 yards a carry, but it was only 4 carries. And he had 7 catches, but it was for only 29 yards. So I don't know if this just isn't a scheme for him, but what
that was with Jaleel McLaughlin out. Jaleel McLaughlin didn't play. Audric Estime, I believe, had like 10 points. So, I don't know.
Carries for 48 yards and a touchdown is what Estime had.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. And the whole running game for the Broncos just overall, not great. It's a lot of Bo Nix sprinkled in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just seem to spread it around to everybody. Blake Watson got 4 carries as well. Blake Watson, a guy I liked in this last draft. But this is one of those guys where you don't trust starting him. I guess right now we just have to hold on and see if he goes anywhere next year. But if you get a good offer in the inbox for Javonte, you're going to have to consider taking it. So,
yeah, I mean, a good offer, Mike, you'd move him for any second round pick.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah, definitely. So those were some hits and misses from us for the 2024 Dynasty Fantasy Football season, which is going to be wrapping up soon. Crazy to believe, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's flew by.
Yeah,
it always does.
Got more college playoffs. But listen, hang out here. Stay tuned. We got another pod coming up very soon. More videos coming your way. The offseason is approaching, it's going to be more rookie mock drafts, all that good stuff. And if you want more from us, 24/7, 365, patreon.com/Dynasty Rewind. Go ahead, get yourself a free 1-week trial. Grab some merch in our merch store. The link is down below. But until next time, everybody, for Nate, I'm Mike. Thank you for listening.